Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good to see you all.
Truly is.
Smiling, happy faces. Yeah.
Are you recording?
Yes, I'm recording.
I couldn't see.
The smile is actually everything, and I think today's entire topic and talk could be summarized by the smile on Thich Nhat Hanh's face, regardless of whether he's 16 or 94. And we'll take a tour through some photos to look at that. Um, I'm not a Buddhist scholar or historian, and I'm certainly not Vietnamese. And Thich Nhat Hanh is technically not directly of our lineage, but I've always found him to be incredibly inspiring. And as I was reviewing some of the materials early this morning, and I said to Lori, I said, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get through this without tearing up. So, and she said, well, that would be okay. And so we'll see. But he's 94 years old. We're a little bit late. His birthday was October 11th. And when I look at any individual piece of writing or lecture or activism or calligraphy or teaching or institution established by Thich Nhat Hanh, the level of inspiration runs deep. And it raises for me the question and the raises for me the urging, what does my life mean? What do our lives mean? What meaning will we give them? And I mean that in a non-Zen way, because of course, somebody could say, well, there is no meaning, but that's not the sense in which I'm saying that. So 94 for me would be another 30, 32 years.
32 years.
32 years. So, I got some catching up to do, but we'll see, and some of you on the call are younger than that and have even more time. I just want to start with a couple of readings, first of all, because I think one of the things that I admire most and aspire to is the ability to articulate these teachings in a way that is moving, pure, and accurate without being arcane. I think Thich Nhat Hanh has a way of making these teachings throughout time quite accessible and meaningful to our modern lives. So some of you will have seen this book before. I've raised it before. We've talked through it before. I may have handed it to a couple of you. It's called Old Path, White Clouds, Walking in the Footsteps of Buddha. It's rather thick and it's huge, but it's Thich Nhat Hanh's compilation from the history of Buddha. And it really is the historical retelling or the historical tale of Buddha's life, from his life as a royal and then leaving his family and all of that behind, and the moment of awakening and establishing Buddhism as a school and a practice, and then having followers and all the way through. One of the things I always appreciated about this book was handed to me. I was working on a television commercial. I suspect because of the timing for Apple Computer, and an editor I was working with, first name of David, and I'm trying to remember his last name, but I will get it. Lived in Topanga. We worked down in Venice. But we were talking about his practice at one point, and he just handed me this book. And, you know, sometimes it's that simple where you hand somebody a book. A few years earlier than that, this is suspicious coming from the guy that said don't pay too much attention to books, but there you have it. A few years earlier than that in New York City, when I was working on the IBM account and the Perrier account and advertising, my long-term mentor, Steve Hayden, also handed me a book, Awakening the Buddha Within. And he said, I think you might like this. And it was really the first time that somebody had handed me a book on Buddhism. And I'll be honest, and I've been honest with Steve, I've never read that whole book. But still, it was a moment. And some of you will have recalled Steve flying out from New York to show up for my Tokido and then the Shuso Hosen ceremony. He took that level of interest in my own development along the spiritual path, even though, you know, our formal relationship was in the world of advertising. So anyway, David, the editor, handed me this book. It's little chapters throughout Buddha's life, and it's very digestible. And if you feel so inspired, it's kind of fun. You can just read a little bit at a time and learn some of the history. I wanted to jump all the way to chapter 63 because this is one side of Thich Nhat Hanh's teaching is taking this history and bringing it to life. During his travels, the Buddha stopped in the village of Alavi. The Buddha and 8 monks were offered a meal in a public building there, while all the local people were served food as well. Following the meal, the Buddha was about to begin a Dharma talk when an elderly farmer, almost out of breath, entered the hall. He was late because he had to search for a lost water buffalo. The Buddha could see that the old farmer had not eaten all day, and he asked that rice and curry be served to the old man before he would begin the Dharma talk. Many people felt impatient. They did not understand why one man should be allowed to hold up the Buddha's discourse. When the farmer was finished eating, the Buddha said, "Respected friends, if I delivered a Dharma talk while our brother was still hungry, he would not be able to concentrate. That would be a pity. There is no greater suffering than hunger. Hunger wastes our bodies and destroys our well-being, peace, and joy. We should never forget those who are hungry. It is a discomfort to miss one meal, but think of the suffering of those who have not had a proper meal in days or even weeks. We must find ways to assure that no one in this world is forced to go hungry." After Alavi, the Buddha followed the Ganga northwest toward Kosambi. Sorry for slaughtering these words. Any of you scholars there, Tennessee, you can help me out. He paused to watch a piece of driftwood being carried downstream. He called to the other monks, pointed to the piece of wood, and said, "Bhikkhus, if that piece of driftwood does not become lodged against the riverbank, if it does not sink, if it does not become moored on a sandbar, if it isn't lifted out of the water, if it isn't caught in a whirlpool or rot from the inside out, it will float all the way to the sea. It is the same for you on the path. If you don't become lodged against the riverbank, if you don't sink, if you don't become moored on a sandbar, if you are not lifted out of the water, if you do not become caught in a whirlpool or rot from the inside out, you are certain to reach the great sea of enlightenment and emancipation." The bhikkhu said, "Please, Lord, explain this more fully. What does it mean to become lodged against the riverbank, to sink, or to be moored on a sandbar?" The Buddha answered, "To become lodged against the riverbank is to become entangled by the six senses and their objects. If you practice diligently, you will not become entangled in feelings which result from contact between the senses and their objects. To sink means to become enslaved by desire and greed, which rob you of the strength needed to persevere in your practice. To become moored on a sandbar means to worry about serving only your desires, forever seeking advantages and prestige for yourself while forgetting the goal of enlightenment. To be lifted from the water means to lose yourself in dispersion, loitering with people of poor character instead of pursuing the practice. To be caught in a whirlpool means to be bound by the five categories of desire, being caught by good food, sex, money, fame, or sleep. To rot from the inside out means to live a life of false virtue, deceiving the Sangha while using the Dharma to serve your own desires. Bhikkhus, if you practice diligently and avoid these six traps, you will certainly attain the fruit of enlightenment, just as that piece of driftwood will make it to the sea if it overcomes all obstacles. So I just thought that was a nice piece of storytelling. And now you could say, well, wait a minute, those are just the Buddha's words. But we all know that history isn't recorded that way, and it isn't told quite that way, right? There are the different tales of what happened, and then there's the editor, and then there's the voice you give to the story and the way you tell the story. And the fact that this is chapter 63 in a book called Walking in the Footsteps of Buddha, Old Path, White Clouds, it's all a craft, and it's all a creation to share the teachings with somebody like me who was handed the book in an editorial room while creating a commercial for Apple Computer. And I've always appreciated Thich Nhat Hanh's ability to do that storytelling, to pull these things together and tell a story. Moving to a different book, which I spoke from probably a year and a half ago, so maybe three of you will remember that. Maybe four. This is a book of his called The Other Shore, a new translation of the Heart Sutra with commentaries. Now, again, some of the teachings in this will feel a little bit different than what comes, from Maizumi Roshi and the White Plum Sangha and Santa Monica or Yokoji. But one reason I keep revisiting this particular book is Thich Nhat Hanh's way of bringing out elements of the Heart Sutra. And Prajna Heart Zen Center largely is born out of the Heart Sutra, Prajna Heart. And also in our conversations, we have very often run into this, what is this emptiness thing? What is emptiness? So here's what Thich Nhat Hanh has to say. When people hear the word emptiness, they often panic because they tend to equate emptiness with nothingness, non-being, and non-existence. Western philosophy is preoccupied with questions of being and non-being, but Buddhism goes beyond the dualistic notions of being and non-being. I often say, to be or not to be, that is no longer the question. The question is one of interbeing. Now look how he's taken Western and Eastern and steps so fluidly between Shakespeare and Buddhism, right? Remember, he was born in Vietnam and not exiled from there until 1966. If we continue to look into the sheet of paper, so he's talking about, he's holding a piece of paper, a sheet of paper here, and he says, if we continue to look into the sheet of paper, we can see the sunshine in it. If the sunshine is not there, the forest cannot grow. Without the sunshine, nothing can grow, not even us. So we know that the sunshine is also in the sheet of paper. The paper and the sunshine are. Looking more deeply, we can see the logger who cut the tree and brought it to the mill to be transformed into paper. We can also see the wheat. We know that the logger cannot exist without his daily bread. So the wheat that became his bread is also in this sheet of paper. The logger's father and mother are in the paper as well. Without all of these other things, there would be no sheet of paper at all. Looking even more deeply, we can see that we are also in the paper. This is not difficult to see because when we look at a sheet of paper, the sheet of paper becomes the object of our perception. It is becoming more and more clear. Now look at the jump to neuroscientists. It is becoming more and more clear to neuroscientists that we cannot exactly speak of an objective world outside of our perceptions, nor can we speak of a wholly subjective world in which things exist only in our mind. Everything, time, space, the earth, the rain, the minerals in the soil, the sunshine, the cloud, the river, the heat, and even consciousness is in that sheet of paper. Everything coexists with it. To be is to enter be. You cannot just be by yourself alone. You have to enter be with every other thing. This sheet of paper is because everything else is. Suppose we try to return one of the elements to its source. If we return the sunshine to the sun, would the sheet of paper still be possible? No. Without the sunshine, the tree cannot be. If we return the logger to his mother, then we wouldn't have a sheet of paper either. Looking at it in this way, we see that the sheet of paper is made entirely of non-paper elements. And if we were to return any one of these non-paper elements to their source, there would be no paper at all. As thin as a sheet of paper is, it contains everything in the universe. So the one contains the all. But the Heart Sutra seems to say the opposite. In it, Avalokitesvara tells us that all things are empty. Let us look more closely to see why. And then he goes on to talk about emptiness, and he uses the metaphor of a glass of water. And he says, if I show you a glass of water and say, is it full or is it empty? You would say it's full. And if I dump the water out, then you might say that it's empty. And he goes on to say, empty of what? And goes on, and we won't do it here, but to talk about emptiness is always empty of something. So emptiness, just like the sheet of paper, contains everything. So again, you can see taking something like the Heart Sutra, which we chant regularly, and starting to look at the notions of emptiness in it, the notions of everything in it, and this fluid stepping between Eastern and Western, between modern and ancient, between neuroscience and the mystical. You know, I aspire to just ever so little bit of that. You know, how do I, with my life, bring this Dharma forth in a way that other people can see it, feel it, touch it, hear it, receive and maintain it, as we say in the Gata. And how do we do that in this modern world? In this modern world. I want to share my screen because there's some lovely pictures here. And rather than just reading, just run quickly through. This is 16-year-old Thich Nhat Hanh. He was 16 when he entered the monastery. He was born in 1926, so that makes it, 1942. Enters the monastery. Look at the, are you seeing the screen? Yeah. I mean, look at that look on that face. It was just beautiful. Here he is when he's 25, just after receiving the precepts and starting to teach. And here he is as a young teacher. He's up on the far top right. So one of, and this is where I really want to go as we look at 94 years or however many years we have on the planet. As a young monk, Thich Nhat Hanh took it on as a mission, as like, how do we renew Vietnamese Buddhism? How do we make this accessible and real for people? He was one of the very first monks in that era in Vietnam to study a secular topic in university. And this is a funny fact. I thought he was one of the first 6 monks ever to ride a bicycle. It's like, but like, oh, there's the bike. Well, let's ride it. Like, we're monks, we can ride bikes. As he moved on, and I suspect, Galen, this is why you sent me the note saying, I love this. But in the early 60s, here's a picture of him teaching. But as he moved into the 60s and the Vietnam War happened, there was this question among Vietnamese Buddhists of, what is our role here? Do we sit and meditate peacefully and quietly and just, hold the space as meditators? Or do we get out there and engage with the world and take a stance about what we see as real and true? And Thich Nhat Hanh struck a balance between those two. It's like we must remain mindful. We must maintain our practice. We must meditate. And then, as some of you know from the history, he really got out there in the world, teaching peace and love and compassion and opposing this war in his homeland. He really was one of the first people to create this sense of engaged Buddhism. That's what it came out of. And if we look at Bernie Glassman in our lineage, or Joan Halifax, that's really where this engaged Buddhism, ties in. It's like, okay, this is great, but where do the gears mesh, right? Where do the gears of my spiritual practice mesh with the gears of the phenomenal world, the world that we live and work and thrive and cry and love in? Where did those mesh? Another photo from the 60s, and then this with Dr. Martin Luther King. This is 1966 and 67. Martin Luther King nominated Thich Nhat Hanh for the Nobel Peace Prize. I don't believe that happened, but these two worked together. And this was a trip. This was a trip that caused Thich Nhat Hanh's exile from Vietnam. Neither the North nor the South would allow him back into the country. So here's somebody that has devoted their lives to renewing the Buddhist practice in their country, and now they are, in a sense, homeless. In the book The Other Shore, he talks about this. Where is home? Where is the shore? Where do we come home to in our practice when it's not that physical place? So now he's exiled from Vietnam for 39 years. At times he did things like he chartered this boat to rescue refugees. Now he had to find a place to land, so he first landed outside of Paris, France. This is in the 70s, and formed a community called the Sweet Potato Community. Now, as a great grandson of peasant farmers, I can't help but smile at the name Sweet Potato and this photo with a hoe, because I'm never more at home than when my hands are in the dirt. And here in New York, marching with fellow Buddhists. And then in the 80s, founding a larger rural community called Plum Village, which exists to this day. Plum Village started out as a small rural farm It's now one of the largest active monasteries anywhere, with 200 full-time monastics, both men and women, and over 10,000 people a year visit Plum Village. He's gone on to establish monasteries in a number of countries in the US, including Mississippi, in Germany, all over the world. And at this point, it's estimated that about 100,000 people have committed themselves to his modernized code of universal global ethics in everyday life, as he calls it. Modernized code of universal global ethics in daily life. That's some serious impact. Going from a 16-year-old in a monastery to a 25-year-old taking vows, riding a bike, and going, this war is wrong, and I'm going to get out there. And now 100,000 people committed to the vows, and approximately 75,000 people a year going through some form of his training through the different centers and monasteries that he established. Many of you know about 6 years ago, November 11th, 1 month after his 88th birthday, he suffered a severe stroke, and even now is partially paralyzed on one side, and cannot speak. And he has chosen to return to the monastery that he entered when he was 16 years old to live out his last days, months, years. But the teaching goes on, 75,000 people a year. And the last I read, he's still being wheeled out or going out daily in his wheelchair around the grounds of that monastery to be with people. Wow. You know, we each have our own lives to live and to lead. And, 19 years ago, I first sat down on a cushion and was given Zazen instruction in our lineage. Before that, David handed me this book, Old Path, White Clouds. Before that, my mentor handed me a book on awakening the Buddha within. I mean, maybe he just thought I was being a real asshole. I don't know. But where does this stuff come from? Where does it lead to? But I do know 19 years ago, and Sharma, you and I talked about this just recently, that the little glimmer of realization I had that day, or maybe it was a lightning bolt, a thunderclap, there's no judging that. For me, there was no turning back. And I look at Thich Nhat Hanh and am so inspired. Now, I'm inspired by the engaged life, by the devotion to, this has to mean something, and I'm going to share it. And how does a rubber meet the road? Where does the rubber meet the road? How does it meet the road? How loudly does it squeal? How big of a mark does it leave? How fast does that mark wash away? What does it smell like? I hope to God that my rubber meeting the road stinks to high heaven for eternity, and has some lingering effect. And you'll see this in the teachings that we have received and are receiving in our current lineage. Had the great privilege of working with Tenshin Roshi this last week for 4 days on the ox herding pictures. Okay, we're putting together a series of short films where he is taking us through the ox herding pictures, and this is going to be released in a serialized fashion, and probably have Q&A Dharma talk in a few segments there. But now the ox herding pictures are the 10 pictures of a young boy kind of wondering, is there more, or there must be something more, but not knowing where to look, not knowing that it is right under his feet, and then seeing the tracks and embarking on this journey, and and taming the ox, which is that knowledge of our true self, and then becoming at peace with that, and riding the ox home, playing a flute on the back of the ox, right? And then landing at home, and the ox is peacefully grazing. We don't even see the ox in that picture. And then in the eighth picture, there's just an empty circle, the inso. Now the self and the ox have been so completely integrated that they don't even appear in the ox herding picture. And this is where tension said, this is where some people get stuck. And if we get stuck in this vast empty space, now this is the empty space of enlightenment, it's the empty space of creation, right? It's the empty space from which all joy, peace, equanimity springs. This is where self falls away. This is where Dogen says to know the self is to forget the self, and to forget the self is to become one with the 10,000 things in the 10 directions, right? This is it. And some of the ox herding pictures end with this eighth picture. And tension in classic style says, this is not good enough. This is where the narcissistic, self-focused, Zen sickness Buddhism comes in. When you park yourself in this eighth picture, in this vast emptiness, and do nothing with it. And then the ninth and 10th pictures take us forward to where the 10th picture, this young boy has become Hote, this jolly, bare-bellied, bare-chested bodhisattva in the marketplace. His robes are tattered and open. He's got a bag of candy on his back that he dispenses at will. And there's a little boy in that last picture, just like him at the beginning, looking up in that exchange of the Dharma. And so our teachers, and those of you that trained with Yoshin know this is true as well. You know, Yoshin would swear like a mofo about this is no good if it becomes narcissistic, self-fulfilling prophecy. And this is what tension is saying too. It's like you gotta go on from that eighth circle through the ninth and the 10th and back around the circle. What are you gonna do with it? Where do we take it? How do we share it? And I think that, you know, Thich Nhat Hanh's life is just such a beautiful example of that. Entering the practice pure and simple, and then walking in the marketplace with all that that entails. Or as manifested by Lori on the open manhole cover, don't walk past the damn manhole cover. See what's inside, see if somebody's hurt, see what you can do. Now, this is not to say that all of us and each one of us should go find a monastery and throw everything away and do that. But what is your expression of the Dharma? You know, what will be our legacy? How do we heed the call of Thich Nhat Hanh and our various teachers to do something with this? So that's where I'm at. And you know, happy birthday, Master. What a master, and what an example. Yeah. Well, that's what I'm doing with it this morning anyway. You know, we'll see what I do with it this afternoon. Any comments, questions, anything that any of you would like to add that you know about Thich Nhat Hanh that I have not covered, or just where you're at with all of this, and your contribution would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, took tremendous influence on me, starting in the 60s, long before Buddhism meant much of anything to me. And, you know, I have a book recommendation too. Before I found the Zen Center, Yokoji, I found the book, The Heart of Buddha's Teaching. And it's not the historical rundown, it's the philosophical explanation of it all. And once again, I had read, I'd been exposed, I'd appreciated Thich Nhat Hanh's work for peace, but when I read his books, they always came across kind of soft to me. I mean, it's, how do I deal with anger? How do I deal with whatever his subject was? And they're little pamphlets, and as much as I appreciated them, they didn't resonate inside until I found that book, The Heart of Buddha's Teachings, where he went A through Z explaining this practice. And it made me want to learn to meditate, and that's how that was one of the major influences. The other thing that it always intrigued me about Thich Nhat Hanh was that notion that when he went away to try to end the war, neither side would let him come back. This is the classic do not pick and choose. His whole practice, those young people in Vietnam, right down to the monk who self-immolated, and when it was such a famous picture, they wouldn't pick a side. The North believed that they were pro-American, and the Americans believed that they were pro-North. It was do not pick and choose. Amazing kind of standard to hold for me. Always has been.
Thank you, Galen.
Great man.
Yeah, thank you, Galen. Yeah, my friends up at Self-Realization Fellowship, they hold that do not picking and choosing line, and it's interesting. It's sometimes hard for me as an engaged American, to go, well, I'm a Buddhist and I'm not going to pick and choose, and I've already voted, so I've picked and chosen, and I think that's important. But it is interesting at those purest levels of practice, that, boy, I don't want to say removal, but that not picking and choosing, is well said, right? Because it's not really removed from the world. It's just a way of being in the world with whatever one's spiritual path is.
Not getting caught up.
Sure. And I think that he picked and choose too. He said, I pick peace over war.
Yeah.
His thing was just absolute in terms of, we need to try to be peaceful.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, what an incredible influence.
Yeah. And, I was thinking about this morning. I mean, we've got a big election in front of us, and one that I care about. And with some of the history I've been through, and some of us have been through, like, how do I play this? And at least at this point in time, I'm a believer in the practice and what it reveals about what is true and what is so, and in the precepts as a form for expressing the practice. And I trust that people will make good choices. And that's where I'm at right now. I really truly believe that this practice, coupled with the precepts, the precepts are the practice, will lead us to a good place. Ken.
Good morning, Sangha. Thank you, Dan, for reminding us about Thich Nhat Hanh. I was lucky enough to hear him speak at the Santa Monica Convention Center back in the mid-1990s. The place was packed, and it was as silent as you could ever hope to hear silence. And what I got from that talk was his intense connection to not only what he was saying, but to all of us. I absolutely felt he was talking to me. And there's, 5,000 other people, or how many other people there were. But what I got from him was this intense connection to himself, his word, and us. And that was illustrated almost like Dan, you and your Koan Bell, that was illustrated at some point in the talk where he just hit his little bowl, and it was as if someone woke me up, and all he said was, breathe. I was like, man, this guy is tuned in. So that's what I remember. The message, I don't remember what it was in conjunction with. I know he was visiting California, and we were lucky enough to get him into Santa Monica. But all I got was intense connection. I mean, wow. Talk about being a pearl in the net. I mean, holy moly, there it was.
Mm.
So I was very lucky to have gone to that talk. And a few years later, a massage client of mine said, hey, Ken, I've got a couple tickets to Poly Pavilion, this weekend. You want to go see the Dalai Lama? And I said, yes. So in one fell swoop, I got to not only listen to and connect with Thich Nhat Hanh, but the Dalai Lama. And those people, those two, masters were purveyors of connection. I mean, that's pretty much what I got. Absolutely connected. And he wanted me to be connected too. And so thank you, Dan.
I mentioned Thich Nhat Hanh's smile. I mentioned his smile in the photo, and I know that Thich Nhat Hanh often mentions the smile. But I just wanted to underscore that because I know that I often will reference your smiles, like whether on the screen or in person, and it's a powerful thing, and it really comes through. So whether it's a small smile or a broad smile or a belly laugh, remember to share that, because that is your true nature bursting out. I'm not talking about, okay, I'm doing modeling shot, what is it, Soko? Chin down, eyes up, not the beguiling, okay, here's my headshot smile, but just that pure expression that comes out. Use it freely. When I was first learning to run marathons, we have a friend, Mary Haskins. She's a walking, living, breathing smile. And she said, when it gets really hard around mile 20, just remember to smile. And I'll be damned if it doesn't actually make a physical difference as well. So remember that. Anybody else? I think you guys know the drill. Get out there and be yourself, and let the rubber meet the road. Love you all, and thank you so much for joining us this morning.